All right, so it is 7:27 a.m., November 10th. It is a Sunday, and this is intended to be the 12th installment of In the Grip of ThermostatAnon, which, if you have been following along, will recall immediately is a response to YouTube's censorship of a video that I made 4 years ago following the January 6th insurrection and terrorism at the Capitol. The claim that YouTube is making is that it violates the harmful policy on conspiracy theories, and my counterclaim is that it does just exactly the opposite. It politically satirizes all of the conspiracy theories that went into the making of the violence of January 6th, and for that reason alone is important to retain as a piece of freedom of expression and critique of just how insane, and criticism and critique of just how insane and violent a certain faction of our political reality is right now, and that should be obvious to everyone. But apparently, half of us are not sane, and therefore is not obvious in any way, shape, or form. So, that being said, this is the standard introduction, and then I think I've been forgetting to make the disclaimer, but because the characters in this particular narrative do in fact relate to individuals who exist in our world, and I'm not disclaiming that any relationship of the characters presented in this meta-multi sci-fi comiverse do not exist in our universe and is completely accidental. But I am claiming that so far as the reality of the depictions in this narrative are concerned, this is either an allegory or science fiction version of our reality, or fictionalized, story that relates to events that actually happened, but that don't confirm, physical actions in our universe. In other words, the disclaimer that I've made prior, and I think I've forgotten for a couple of days, but I want to reemphasize here, is that if the FBI or some other agency of authority and justice is using my videos and images from this particular comic to as evidence, in the convictions of those individuals involved in the January 6th conspiracy against the Capitol experience, they should, cease and desist from doing so, because just because someone appears in this particular comic version of and expression of events that actually did occur in our universe doesn't mean that that the individual that image represents actually perform those activities in our universe. All right, so that's the disclaimer. And just simply put, without all the verbiage, if you're part of the FBI, you shouldn't use this video. Let's just put it this way: this video shouldn't be sufficient cause, right, for you to arrest anyone who you recognize and is presented within it. All right, okay, so that's the important disclaimer, and we'll move on to this image now. Unfortunately, I can't recall where I acquired this hero. He looks a little bit like a futuristic version of Jules Verne's Captain Nemo, so perhaps he exists in the Jules Verne universe, or maybe in some Alan Moore universe that takes up the characters of the League of Gentlemen, and he represents Captain Nemo. I'm not entirely sure. I can't, does anyone out there remember the nonlinear Luther B list? We certainly remember who, Luther Blissett is, that Luther B is, so linear B, is, if anyone remembers, linear B is a writing system, so therefore that idea of the linear is ancient, right? One of the first textualizations that have a more or less one-to-one correspondence between signifier and sign. That's a way of expressing language, right? Textual language. So linear B, you can look that up, and then Luther B is of course Luther Blissett, and it combines those two things. So we're talking about code and language, and then this question: does anyone remember? Which seems to be coming up for us a lot, both in the text and transcripts of this particular story, and in our own experience, failing to remember some of what happened. I suppose if there were a conspiracy involving that, it would be that well, on the right's side, the conspiracy would be that something like the libs, they the libs, they say the libs because they really don't, and that's liberal, right? Or the Dems because they don't like democracy or freedom, right? Just reminding everyone that liber is the Latin word for freedom, right? So if you don't like libs, then you don't really like freedom. If you don't like Dems, then you don't really like democracy. But he's very angry here, isn't he? Or it looks very serious. That menacing, scrunchy eyebrow thing that he does there. And the pipe, I guess, is part of what draws me to a reading of this guy as some kind of seafaring captain or something, and maybe Captain Nemo. But anyway, where were we on the thing? Oh yeah, we were trying to come up with a conspiracy theory that would account, for our failure to remember, names and events and the meanings of those events, and fail to remember how political satire works, or what irony is, or even what synecdoche or metonymy or metaphor are, or what allegory is, or any number of filters, right, that go into the making of literature and fiction, if you wanted to call them filters, or we could call them, rhetorical figures, or, figures of speech, or uses of language games. But I guess if we were going to come up with a conspiracy theory that, involved our forgetting, on the right side, it would be that, they're putting chemicals in our pizza, as in Pizzagate. They put chemicals on our pizza that cause our memory to fail, and then we don't remember what happened at the pizza parlor, and don't remember how all this rain came out of the sky, or and how it was so obvious that these big storms were caused by the government. And anyway, so it could be chemicals in the Pizzagate. It could be something like maybe it's one of the other effects of the gay frog water, or fluoride, because now we have RFK Jr., the anti-vaxxer, who's been an anti-vaxxer for years, but promises that we shouldn't worry, that he's not going to take away our polio vaccines and the vaccines that have kept us safe from deadly diseases for generations. If you've ever known anyone who had polio, and what the experience of that was like. Lori's father was a child victim of polio, and eventually, died from it, from a condition that's called post-polio syndrome that can occur, late in life, and it's basically it's not the same thing as the experience of polio, but it's quite devastating. In any case, for some of us, those vaccines, which are relatively, if you want to know like the history of this like branch of medicine, you can probably you can start with Mary Curie, and the work that she did on germs and sanitation and things like that, and then you can work your way up to Jonas Scripps, who worked not far from the area in which I grew up in La Jolla, California, and who at the time that when he first moved to La Jolla, California, individuals of Jewish heritage were not allowed to live in the town, and therefore he had to have a place out of town. That's part of the history of the University of California at San Diego, although it gets suppressed, which is about I don't know, a 20th of a mile, maybe a very, very short distance away. The boundaries of the University of California and the boundaries of Scripps Institution, not Scripps Hospital. There are a few organizations named after Jonas Scripps in that area. The hospital in San Diego, and the the Science Center and Institution in La Jolla. But in any case, some of us have benefited from these vaccinations, which now I suppose are, from the right's point of view, part of a conspiracy theory. So maybe those vaccinations, may be what is causing our memory to fail. And I guess from our point of view, I guess the conspiracy theory would be that this massive amount of misinformation that conspiracy theories present, right, is the source of the failure of memory, because that there's too much misinformation out there to keep track of what actually exists as real. And anyway, whoever this guy is with this beautiful hair, doesn't he have beautiful hair? Both the beard and the. We'll get into how facial hair and can change your look if you're moving from one universe or one political theater to another, and you want to perform in a different way. We'll get there when we get to another character in both our universe and in the meta-multi sci-fi comic-verse. But for now, just observing the grace and charm of all those wavelets, and this kind of white stripe, dark hair that this guy has. Captain Nemo or no, or Alan Moore or no, or Michael Moorcock or no, relative. In our universe, this is not Q, but IQ. And I guess in some ways he's the anti-Q. And as you would expect from IQ, which may or may not be an acronym for an intelligence quotient. And if it's not an acronym for intelligence quotient, it's an acronym for a set of identities that this individual can pass through that includes intelligent quotient. And so he's a smart guy. He doesn't belong to American Mensa. I guess, he opted out on that. Or he couldn't identify which of the tables, was round. Or, maybe didn't respond to that question on the form. Maybe he has dysgraphia and couldn't fill out the little bubbles correctly. Because I think the Mensa test, I'm not sure, but I think it still occurs in the form of a Scantron test, and with number 2 pencil required. I could be wrong. In any case, in our universe, he's referring to here the Q knots, and okay, so Q knots again suggest this sort of nautical theme, you know, like from the Argonauts, right? And he's got the pipe, and he looks kind of piratey with his beard and everything. So the Q knots instead of Q anons, and so non, you know, becomes knots, you know, via, and then it's interesting because you put a K in there, right? Like so, like tangled up, I guess, knots as well. So like, let's see if we can put anything in on knots. So knots, you know, in in a lot of, you know, like Lacanian, you know, psychological like jargon and stuff, different kinds of knots have different kind of you know, psychological significance. And knots, I don't know why, but there's, you know, intellectuals, particularly like jargony intellectuals, are really drawn to knots as symbols of some cognitive or psychological principles. So what I want to look up is the first thing, you know, in deciphering this message from IQ is you know, how knots function as symbols or metaphors of you know, of various, you know, psychological and cognitive processes and epistemologies perhaps, and other aspects of knowing. We mentioned we did a piece on noetic time, and you know, IQ is really like one of those characters. He's concerned with, you know, he, as you can see from the speech. I'll just read the first one first before we look up the Q knots. But he's really quite witty, you know, in addition to being a deep thinker, and so he plays with all of these things, but he moves them around very quickly, right? So, dear Q knots, your reality checks, you know, get the idea. Reality, you know, reality checks. Your reality checks have been placed in the U.S. mail. Even though it is just another government conspiracy and probably doesn't really exist anyway, and should gladly reach you on Tuesday. In reference to the hamburgers, hence the hamburgers on the bottom, right? Gladly reach you on Tuesday. That's from Wimpy and Popeye. Since he's a cartoon or comic, you know, he plays with the other comics and cartoons. You get the idea. High noon time, Georgia time, of course, because there's all this contention about the electoral votes in Georgia, so he's referring to that. High noon tide, because again, you know, the nautical reference, but like it also refers to like high noon, the showdown at, you know, at noon, high noon. The sun is in the sky. High noon tide, you know, so it's a play on that. Georgia time, you get it. And then Georgia, you know, well, anyway, you know, Georgia is played with in the selection of the hero that the Guardians of the Galaxy, you know, finally decide upon. I won't give it away. That's one thing we haven't spoiled. I think we spoiled just about everything else. So we don't want to give that away. But then the Wimpy reference leads to the Happy Hamburgers. The Happy Hamburgers is, again, he's making fun of the neo-Nazi, you know, use of the HH, as in Mike Lindell when he charged, you know, whatever it was, you know, $88 and, you know, some cents, you know, for a pillow, or some amount, and 88 cents for some pillow, you know, and in these crypto-fascist circles, you know, HH is supposed to be Heil Hitler. They're not very like inventive, but they're annoying. But so Happy Hamburgers, and what they put in them is a reference to and that's kind of obscure, but that's a Jack Spicer reference. If you're fond of American poetry, and you know you can look up Jack Spicer American poetry and you can find out, and it's from what's the name of that volume called? It's a book, you know, it's what is the name of that volume? I see. They put it's in there. It's definitely in there. Do you think they could get the the memory deteriorating gay frog water into the coffee. I'm drinking coffee today, and so I want to question this as a conspiracy theory. Jack Spicer. So the book. Oh gosh, what it? Let's. Oh, I don't want anybody to see that because we're gonna come back to that. I don't want to give that. I'm almost spoiling again. Let me open up a new thing. Jack Spicer. Poet. Here's Jack Spicer. There's an image of Jack Spicer. Guys, they don't have the list of his work, do they? The collected books of Jack Spicer. I know it's in the collected books of Jack Spicer. Lori, do we have a copy of the collected books of Jack Spicer?
I think so.
Oh, thanks. All right. So this should take care of it. Let's go back to this image. Okay, so the happy hamburgers, you know, we pulled that out of Wimpy, and it sort of began with the reality checks, and those were placed in the mail, and then like even though the government doesn't exist, the reality checks are still going to get to you on Tuesday, and you were also IQ is very clever, and you'll also recall that there was COVID relief at this time, but there was also conspiracy theory that there was no such thing as COVID. So why should you have your COVID relief checks if there was no COVID, right? Let's see, collected. And so anyway, so from the U.S. mail, we get to when they're going to get there, and that's reference to Popeye. And then that brings us to the hamburgers. Heads of the town, that's what it's called. The heads of the town. All right, and in heads of the town, I don't know why I can't remember that. There are often references to, is it the heads of the town? Let me see what the it is. Yeah, I believe it's because of the town. See if I can find it. Lori, do you remember what poem and what they put them in? The tanks. You remember the name of that one? Is it? Do you? Tanks and what they put them in, or tanks are what they put in them, rather. I'm having a hard time finding this. Oh, I think it's in a footnote. Oh, there it is. I just saw tanks. No, I lost it. I saw tanks, but I lost it. There's a tanks. He said, "You're welcome." They said, "This isn't it," but oh yeah, okay. So not what they put in them. Here it is. I found it. This is page 130 of the collected books of Jack Spicer, and the poem at the top, which I'm out of focus here. See if I can get this in a little better focus. If I can, I don't have enough hands, and then this little keyboard is in my way here. Next time I'm going to do this, I'll bring more hands. So this is a poem Ronnie wrote the other evening. Jack of lack, the back of our hands tattooed with you, wherewithal appalling willows in the trees, and the boy's knees, or anything we sank in tanks, thanks to you. And then the footnote is the following. The figure of Jim begins to emerge in the poem. The poet uses all his resistance to try to create the figure of a person at once lost and unlikely. The unlikeliness is also the first hint of metaphor. Metaphor, not metonymy or synecdoche. The tanks and what they store in them remind the reader that the muses are daughters of memory. And we have spoken at length on the muses being the daughters of memory, and why that is, and the various forms, that their relationship to memory, takes. That's in the long series that we did, reiterating what all of the things that David Anton has to say regarding Aristophanes' version of the story of Oedipus, the comic play by Aristophanes that recounts the story of Oedipus. And I don't believe we ever finished that. David, Anton managed to get through his lecture within the course of an hour, or just beyond an hour, and we spent probably hundreds of hours trying to repeat what he said, and probably got about halfway through. I remember abandoning the project, but it was at the request of the spirit of the night, and some savvy and sage advice that we received from that particular muse who had learned to write, and that's all I'll say about that. And that particular muse, the muse of writing, should not be confused with the muse of dyslexia, dysgraphia, and or dyscalculia, right? Okay, who is well, let's just put it this way, who we work with quite often. The poem is for the princess. So without getting into all the stuff that needs to be deciphered and decoded in this, the happy hamburgers, which again also refers to that whole crypto-fascist 88 thing. So I guess that's something they stole from us, or from our BRE thing, and so that whole thing, that's in there, and then and what they put in them, it's interesting. Like, so that itself is a misremembering, right? So I don't know, like failure on the part of the muses, a failure on the part of the muses, but maybe he intends it to be so. I mean, his name is IQ after all. The tanks, it's actually, and what they store in them, right? And then that would help you get here if you've even read Jack Spicer. Does anyone out there remember Jack Spicer? Do I have any viewers who remember Jack Spicer? Who knew Jack Spicer? The tragic muse, that's an interesting one. She isn't real, she isn't pure. Aside from that, her teeth are poor. If you listen to her, you will listen for real. Her front and her back teeth will bite you for real. And you go to bed with a slough and a sigh and listen the next morning, whatever you said. And then he reminds us again that the muses are the daughters in memory. Oh, the mouses. Like, was it mouses over here, or did I? See, that's the problem with my kind of dyslexia. I'll just read the muses. I won't even see the mouses. Here they're muses. See, there's a whole thing with Apollo and the mice. Apollo's mice, and they become mouses over here. Even though really Apollo originally, he didn't have anything to do with the muses. Kind of like patriarchy, taking over and reinventing itself in relationship to women's work. The mouses are the daughters of memory. They became rats later, and okay, it goes on from there. We can get really bogged down in Jack Spicer because he's a really interesting poet and kind of fun to talk about and play with. But our purpose here was just to locate the tanks. And it turns out my memory failed. I thought it was what they keep in them. It's what they store in them. And of course, there's the play with, what kind of tanks we're talking about. Is it like, water tanks? Or are they those kind of artillery tanks that perform, martial actions in war and in the oppression of ordinary citizens? They show up here, right? And Jack of lack, the back of our hands tattooed with you, wherewithal appalling willows in the trees and that boy's knees, or anything we sank in tanks. So when you say we sank in tanks, it sounds like, well, or it could be, I would probably interpret that way, sank in tanks. It sounds like you could put, into a well. I used to have a well when I had a big property in California that had a lot of iron in it, and I would have to sink this iron removal device into the tank, and then that device, collected, through the use of either ozone or regular oxygen when your ozone creator, broke and you couldn't afford to buy another one, but you could, find an oxygen, pressure unit, fairly cheaply. But running oxygen or ozone through that little filter caused it to collect iron, right? And so you had to sink that in there and then remove the iron from the tanks. But you could also misread this as that other kind of tank. So in tanks, and then and what they store in them, whether it's, just, some water or fluid or grain or, wasn't it Carson's? What's the guy's name? The insane, brain surgeon, Ben Carson's, who insists that Joseph, right, of Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors, who was sold by his brothers in slavery to the Egyptians, learned to be the best slave that he could be and make the best out of a bad situation. The bad situation was he was a slave, but he was just such a good honest guy, that he was the best slave. And for the Egyptians, he invented the pyramids to hold grain. Because the pyramids were not ancient burial mounds based on the Egyptian belief that the pharaoh was an incarnation of the god Horus, right? But rather, was it Horus or just maybe just his own god? I don't know, but I always associate it with Horus, the child of Isis and Osiris, but and because he's kind of a redeemer figure, like Christ-like in that sense, right? One of the many, you could say, lords of light, which is also, if you because we did a thing on acronyms and little o, right? And just recently, and so Lord of Light, just pointing that out, is another acronym for LOL, right? Or it creates the acronym LOL, which is also possible to read as laugh out loud. And oh yeah, we were talking about Ben Carson's, and I think we got that from the tanks and what they store in them. So, like for Ben Carson's, a pyramid is a tank, and what they store in them, it is grain. Now, like this is really interesting. So, like, how would you get the grain in the top of the pyramid? Because presumably, these are huge structures, right? You couldn't just keep pushing grain in from the bottom. So I guess you could use your helicopter, fly it to the top. The top, opens up. Or you had just a lot of empty space at the top of the pyramid, and just maybe 2 or 3 feet of grain at the bottom. It seems like a lot of empty space and a strange way to design a way of storing it, but and a lot of work to do so, because I'm not really sure what functional value all that empty space would have. Okay, so you either have a lot of empty space in the pyramid, or somehow you manage to get the grain not to weigh anything so that it can levitate up to the top, or you got to pour that grain in from the top of the pyramid. I'm telling you, you look it up. Look up Ben Carson's famous, brain surgeon who can drill a little hole in the side of your head and change your memory. And pyramids and good Joseph, the good slave. Now, I'm not calling I'm not suggesting that Ben Carson's is that word, that plantation word that was sometimes used derogatorily. I'm not suggesting that. In the manner of apophysis, or paralepsis. No, is it apostasy? Or aposta, or paralepsis? I'm not suggesting. Let's look up paralepsis. I'm not suggesting in a paraleptic manner that Ben Carson's is that wants to be a good slave, but he does tell this story about Joseph wanting to be a good slave. Somehow, like, the muse of memory is just really evading me today. So we've talked about this figure in a variety of ways, and specifically, how it may or may not differ from paralepsis. apophysis. And I just wanted to clarify that I'm not in some apophysistic way or parallepsistic way referring to Ben Carson's as that word that we haven't uttered, that sometimes individuals who do what Master says and don't identify with their own best interests or the safety, security, and well-being of their own people are called. But he did say about Joseph that Joseph was a really good slave because he invented the pyramids to store grain. And before that, they had to store all of their grains on just any young boy's knees. So, yeah, you can look up apophysis. All right, let's get back to our image. Oh shoot, okay, it's in the history, so we'll be able to get back to it. We may not even get beyond this image today. I was hoping that we would get much further. We haven't even. That's the problem with IQ is it takes a while, to fully interpret and understand exactly what he's doing with language sometimes. Like I said, the Jack Spicer reference was pretty obscure, and then particularly because he didn't quote it verbatim, but rather, as they say, put it in his own words, and so that made it a little bit more difficult to recognize. This one, happy hamburgers and what they put in them, and then this seems to be his signature, which is interesting. I'm not sure why IQ would sign his name. Cecine Peep, I think there's a Michel Foucault graphic novel that spends an inordinate amount of time discussing the differences between apples and oranges. That's for whatever reason titled Ceci n'est pas une pipe, and it's interesting that all of this is being said not through his lips but through his pipe. He refuses, to unclench his teeth and lips, and so we seem to hear it, both out of his pipe, and perhaps that's why the pipe allows itself to sign IQ's, to form, its claim about itself, as a signature in this utterance or statement that IQ is making here at the bottom, like signed, Ceci n'est pas un pipe, and then over here, because of the way that the words are presented as coming out of the pipe, we get the sense that, and we wouldn't have this sense if the words weren't coming out of the pipe, I believe, but IQ, gave us this sense because of that, right? Like these words seem to be coming out of the side of his mouth. So let's look that up to see if there's any reference on the internet to speaking out of the side. Speaking out the side of your mouth. Does that mean something? Talking out of both sides of your mouth is an idiom that means to give different opinions or advice about something in different situations, or to say something that is the opposite of what you have said before. So talking out of both sides of your mouth, like, okay, so is he doing that? Well, he's talking out of one side of his mouth and the other side of his pipe. And then the pipe becomes the mouth. And I don't know, is that a metonymy maybe? Because we associate the pipe with the mouth? If you take metonymy strictly as an associative figure, right, like almost association in physical space, then you could say that that's a metonymy for mouth. The pipe isn't a metonymy for mouth because we associate it with the mouth because the mouth is what does the piping or the smoking of the pipe, right? So it could be a visual metonymy for the figure talking out of both sides of your mouth. But again, like IQ is very difficult to interpret because of his, monumental intellectual skill and quick wit, right? To say something that is the opposite of what you have said before, or to express different opinions about something in different situations. Okay, so maybe something like that is going on in the second set of verbalization that he does here. And notice this one isn't signed. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be because the pipe isn't doing the speaking, right? But I guess it could be signed by, IQ's, what would that be? That's his left, our right mustache or something like that. It could be, or it could be signed, by IQ's, left side of mouth or whatever. But he doesn't do that. And then he recites the alphabet here, L, M, N, O, and then the P is missing. But he moves on to the Q, and he says, sorry, Q again. We got Q and knots up there. Oh, originally I was doing a search for knots, and I got boggled down in all this stuff, going on in IQ's speech. Let's go back, and before we move on, I'll just point out what I was going to point out, L, M, N, O, and then the P is missing, right? At the P in pipe. Cecina Baum Pipa. P is missing over here. So, I mean, I think the P is a reference to pipe, and maybe the P is a reference to something else. He moves on to Q, and that also references that child joke. I don't really want to get into it too much, but he's not above that kind of humor, that kind of raunchy physical humor. So there's the kids joke. They tell this when you're in kindergarten, and Timmy really had to go to the bathroom. He asked his teacher if he could leave to go to the bathroom. The kindergarten teacher says, "No, Timmy, you can't go to the bathroom." I guess she's an authoritarian or whatever. I don't know what she's. Or this is just the way that children perceive the teacher, right? Like that she makes us do all these mean things that we don't want to do, and even though that's not really the case. So Timmy has to recite the alphabet before he goes to the bathroom, and he attempts to do this, and then he gets to the P, and then he stops, and he's like has this look of terror and trauma, and and this will lead later to his PTSD or whatever. But at this point, it's just like surprise and shock and shame and humiliation and horror. And the kindergarten teacher asks Timmy, so where's the P? And he says, running down my pants. Okay, so that Q is, or IQ rather, IQ is referencing that here, and then he skips the P, and he just moves on. There's no indication that he's peeing his pants. Obviously, he's making fun of that idea. And then moves on to, and maybe this is also about like the new alt-rights, like not liking education and being like a 5-year-old child and thinking that, the teacher is their enemy or whatever because they don't want to learn and they don't want to be corrected when they make a mistake, and they don't want their conspiracy theory, to be criticized and evaluated and informed upon. So, the teacher is the enemy because well, our conspiracy theories are what's true, not your damn science and your damn analysis and your damn understanding of language and whatever else, right? So it kind of is referencing that whole mindset with the LMNO, and maybe like in some curious way also referencing the Marcel Duchamp, Elle au coeur, maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to keep track of IQ. This guy, he moves around very quickly. LMNOP, sorry, Q, but I remember, and then we have like another, relationship to the memory, because we're like got a lot of stuff going on with memory here, including the muses being the daughters of them. I remember when we invented you from a cache of Guy Fawkes masks, V left to be discovered among the ruins of Her Majesty's personal maze through the use of a space-time portal called Rupert Urbation's secret backdoor. And that, of course, is the reference to Rupert Murdoch's relationship with British Parliament when he, tried to get his grubby little dirty little hands in British politics and influence the outcome of elections and utilize conspiracy theory and what else, and also tap into private citizens telephone lines and things, and get information in all these nasty illegal ways that he was tried for, and but without much consequence, because just like Donald Trump, you can pretty much do whatever you want if you've got enough money to keep on doing it. But look up the information about some of the scandals involving Rupert Murdoch and his relationship to British Parliament. And there actually was a secret tunnel. It's like, obviously that's a reference to the is it Willie Dixon song? Either Howlin' Wolf or Willie Dixon. I think Willie Dixon wrote it. Howlin' Wolf played guitar and sang on it, and then the Doors do a cover of it. Anyway, so I think the title is I don't know what the title is. Let's just you can do the research. Willie Dixon. I'm referring to this last word right here, right? All right, but the physical reality, whether that was happening with Rupert Murdoch and some of these individuals in the British government or not, that other referent, what did happen was there actually was like a physical little tunnel like that, Rupert could get into some of these chambers and talk to some of these folks. Anyway, so you can look all that up and determine whether I'm producing a conspiracy theory here or whether this actually happened. That's not too hard. Rupert Murdoch isn't that hard to spell. He might be hard to put in jail, for crimes, but his name isn't that hard to spell. All right, so let's, having read that, and we haven't really deciphered all of it yet, but let's go back to the Q knots, and I'll do another internet search for it. Yeah, we're definitely not going to get beyond this image today. I can see that. We're already at almost 54 minutes, so I was hoping that we would get to this other thing. I think it went by very quickly, but I might have created another spoiler for either the image that follows or the one that follows that. So if I did, I'm sorry for spoiling, and if I didn't and it just goes by too quickly, well, that's probably a good thing. So look up Q, or rather knots. I'll just put knots as symbols. And this goes way back. This isn't a thing that Lacan or the internet invented. Knots were symbols in Celtic culture, right? And there's a whole. I used to have a. I don't know if I still do, but I used to have a great book on Celtic or Celtic, however you say the word, knots, and how they're used in art and what they symbolize. Celtic circular knots are often used to symbolize eternity, infinity, cyclical nature of life, etc., etc., etc. Knots are symbols in psychology. Oops. Psychological knots. The knot in the psyche, knots, ties, and bonds and relationships. Okay, psychological knots. Let's just like randomly go through these. That's kind of vulgar. These knots actually like they're and in physics too. Like, right, hold on, I see. Oh, this is cheap. No, this is just like, this is vague. No, I want different kinds, very specific kinds of knots. Anyway, you know, I can't find one like word. Like, should I put in Lacan? I'm not a Lacanian, by the way, and I don't promote, you know, any conspiracy theories involving Lacan. Borromean knot as a symbol in his psychological theory to represent the three fundamental dimensions of subjectivity: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. So that's one example. There's actually like a lot more going on than that. But the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real is an important figure, and this is the Borromean knot, you know, that represents it. The real, right, is the destruction caused at the event of January 6th. The imaginary is the conspiracy theory and cluster of delusions and you know false, you know, deceptive ideological configurations, you know, that lead up to those events and you know, inspire them, and in some ways in the presentation of the subject's, you know, imaginary, justify them, right? The reality are the actions of those individuals, you know, in any event, and the outcomes of those reactions. And then the symbolic is, you know, the system of justice and order, or you know, or authority and power that either, you know, allow those actions like to fall under the aegis of the authority that is sanctioned, right? The sanctity of those actions, you know, or punishment, like the ability to take those individuals to trial, and so in every aspect of the Borromean, you know, knot that IQ is referring to, there's a crisis, right? There's a crisis in the imaginary because the imaginary is delusional, and there's a crisis in the real because it's an event that is about death and destruction, the desire to create mayhem and murder, and there's a crisis in the symbolic because there's no intervening, you know, dimension of consciousness that acknowledges that these actions are in crisis, and that you know allows for a system of justice in which and originally there was, and that's what the Guardians of the Galaxy are all about, right? So you could say, like, looking at it from an erotological point of view, the meta multi, you know, sci-fi comiverse, in the symbolic arena, like what we're exploring are issues of justice, right? And on the good guy's side versus the expression of, you know, unchecked, you know, authoritarian, you know, phallic power, you know, patriarchal misogyny as the shadow side, right, of the symbolic, you know, and the real, you know, represents those events that this universe are referring to in the actual January 6th. In our universe of course, the real gets played out in all kinds of ways because this is a science fiction. But in our universe, you know, whatever that's called, probably not the Jack Spicer universe, and the imaginary is the configuration, right, of the configuration of fantasy, you know, that inspires, right, the relationship to reality, and influences our understanding of the symbolic, right? So the imaginary is whatever it is that in the human psyche that draws us into a relationship with, you know, both of the other terms. We could say, let's see if there's anything more on that. So here's Professor Lacan, I think, yeah. And it's interesting, this is a solarized image, isn't it? I like that it's a solarized image. He's drawing some knots, and oh, this is interesting. Objet petit a at the center of the Borromean knot. To explain why, a friend of mine recently asked me to explain why Jacques Lacan placed objet petit a at the center of the Borromean knot. What follows is my attempt to give a basic answer to that question. Okay, I don't want to read all of this, do I? There's the there's a reference to us, phi, right? The imaginary order is all about images, imaginative and perceptual. The spectacular imago or mirror image is perceived. Egos and alter egos, shapes, figures, identification and disidentification, wholeness. Ideal ego, fantasies and daydreams, quote, images, struggle for recognition, rivalry, aggression, aggressivity, over proximity, narcissism, etc. The imaginary order is also dualistic insofar as it is all about two egoic consciousnesses confronting each other with the mediation of the third, symbolic order, big other. Right, that's basically what we said. You think this, I think that. Who's going to arbitrate the symbolic value of that? Who's going to either, you know, justify? So this is what we're doing. Like when we argue with ThermostatAnon about the right of our video, you know, to be presented on YouTube, and our right to critique fascism as it exists in contemporary American politics, we're mediating, right? We're mediating the dualistic ego in some sense with the big other. Like, this is what we're trying to do. Like, we're an attorney. We're presenting this case before the court of law because we exist in a democracy. My viewers are the jurors, and they're gonna like look at what ThermostatAnon had to say, and the justification for ThermostatAnon. I mean, in our favor, we have a lot more. There's a lot more volume in our justification and in the justification to take us down, right? But we're presenting this very long argument, frame by frame, that this piece, you know, it does in fact not promote conspiracy theories, but does just the opposite. And we're presenting it, you know, to this authority. In this case, the symbolic order is represented, you know, at least in part, by the rationality and the ability, like, to interpret and decide, you know, such cases in a democratic universe that is, you know, that we're assigning, you know, to our audience. And of course, our audience can reject our arguments and just say, like, we couldn't follow what you were saying. I'm not really sure I believe in IQ. I don't see why any of what you say is any more rational than what these QAnons present. And, you know, our audience, you know, has that ability, like, to is placed in that position. Now, I mean, obviously, we do believe that there are forms and codes, right, of social institution that you know, more or less, that we want to present as being valuable and viable, and there are rules and prohibitions, and there are structures and grammars and language that, you know, we want to utilize. Even, you know, when we do play with them, we don't play with them in such a way that we, you know, blow shit up or kill people. So we're often very playful, as is IQ, even in our defense and our what's the word? Litigation, right, of this claim, of innocence that we're making, and we don't avoid humor or comedy or, because those muses, who are the daughters of memory, some of them are comic, and some of them. I have to find out whether there's a muse of apostasis or if undoubtedly there is a muse of apostasis, and then and there may be a muse inspired by the idea of the difference between apostasis and paralepsis. We can discuss that another time, but that's just a note for me for future investigation. And then here we have the real. The real involves all of those things that must be repressed in order for our imaginary symbolic reality to function. The real is the order of enjoyment, unconscious death, ride, trauma, radical contingency, inconsistencies, and gaps in imaginary symbolic reality. The real is that which structures our imaginary symbolic reality without being perceivable or symbolized within it, while also threatening to explode it. So in Lacan, nothing is ever as easy as it could be elsewhere. The real shouldn't be confused with reality as it's constructed in the physical sciences or the material realm. It's rather the way that one participates, with the imaginary symbolic, dialectic, and realizes. I would argue, and realizes it in the order of one's actions, which presumably do occur in the real world, whereas the symbolic can be simply contained in one's mind. For it to work as a social institution, you have to realize it. You can't just be a good man in your head. Like I'm sure Mike Pence is a good man in his head, but to a certain extent, right? Did enforce the and conform to the symbolic order, but in another sense, not, right? Because the full and complete teleiosis, right? The teleiosis towards the performance of an institutional positive and ethical relationship to the symbolic would have demanded the invocation, what is the word that I want? The following the duty, right, of evoking the 25th Amendment and removing Trump from office for violating the Constitution. And then we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now, right, because he would actually have been removed from office, and the stage would have been set for us to have recognized Trump's actions on January 6th and those days that led up to it and followed from it as violations of the Constitution. And as a violator of the Constitution, he would not have been allowed to run in a second term. And that, in short, probably short is what, and the construct of that word is what IQ is referring to in the Q knots. And of course, it's also a play on, the knot is a play on not, right? Non. So no, you're not, your reality. Dear Q, now let's just repeat again what he says, and we're over time. I would like to go, into more interpretation of this particular image, but we're 9 minutes over an hour, and I don't want to proceed too much further. So, dear Q-Knots, your reality checks have been placed in the U.S. mail, even though it is just another conspiracy and probably doesn't really exist anyway. He's referring to the government, even though it is another government conspiracy. I guess the U.S. mail is a government conspiracy, not the government. Now, could the government be, in order for there to be government conspiracies, right, the government has to exist, but, you know, maybe not in nonlinear, I don't know, maybe not in nonlinear cause and effect, post cause and effect thinking. So I'm not sure. Let's start again. Dear Q-Knots, your reality checks have been placed in the U.S. mail, even though it is just another government conspiracy and probably doesn't really exist anyway, and should gladly reach you on Tuesday, high noontide, Georgia time. Happy hamburgers and what they put in them, Cecilia Paum Peep, and then, speaking off the other side of his mouth, LMNO, sorry Q, but I remember when we invented you from a cache of Guy Fawkes masks, V-left, to be discovered among the ruins of Her Majesty's personal maze through the use of a space-time portal called Ruperturbation's secret back door. And then we'll pan back. Does anyone remember the nonlinear Luther B list?